Your bones are silently breaking down right now, and you have no idea it's happening. Not from an accident, not from old age, from something far more common and far more preventable. Every single day, your body pulls calcium out of your skeleton to keep your heart beating, because if your blood calcium drops even slightly, your heart simply stops. That is not an exaggeration. That is basic human physiology. And if you are not replacing what your body steals from your bones every single day, you are walking around with a skeleton that is quietly turning into chalk. Doctors have a clinical name for this. They call it osteopenia and later osteoporosis. But for most of human history, people never had this problem, not because they took supplements, not because they drank 3 glasses of milk a day, but because they ate plants. Wild, mineral-dense, calcium-loaded plants that modern diets have almost completely abandoned. Today, I'm going to show you 12 of those plants. Plants you can grow in a backyard, forage on a hike, or grab at any grocery store this week. Plants that built the strongest skeletons in human history, long before dairy farming, long before supplements, long before anyone had ever heard the word calcium. Stick around, because number 5 on this list contains more usable calcium gram for gram than a glass of milk, and number 11 was eaten by Okinawan elders, the longest living people on Earth, almost every single day of their lives. If you want your bones, your teeth, your nerves, and your heart to actually work the way they were designed to work, hit that subscribe button right now. Because every week, I'm bringing you the forgotten plants that healed people for thousands of years before modern medicine ever existed. And before you scroll past this thinking it's just another health video, ask yourself this. When was the last time you actually checked what's rebuilding your own bones? Because most people never do, until a fracture, a stress injury, or a doctor's office finally forces the question. Let's get into it. Here are 12 calcium-rich plants that will heal you instantly, ranked from impressive to absolutely incredible. Number 1. Kale, the bone-building green that outperforms milk. Long before anyone measured minerals in a laboratory, ancient farming communities across Europe and Asia relied on hardy leafy greens like kale to survive brutal winters when fresh food was scarce. These greens grew in cold soil when almost nothing else would. And early healers noticed that the people who ate them stayed strong, stood tall, and rarely suffered the bone weakness that plagued others in old age. Traditional herbalists treated kale as a strengthening food, something fed to children to build sturdy frames and to the elderly to protect against frailty. But here's what most people don't realize. Modern science is now discovering that kale contains a form of calcium that the human body absorbs even more efficiently than the calcium found in dairy milk, because kale is low in the compounds that normally block calcium absorption. It also delivers vitamin K, which directs calcium into your bones instead of letting it drift into your arteries. This is where things get interesting, because researchers studying bone density have found that populations eating high amounts of leafy greens, like kale, show significantly stronger skeletal structure well into old age. It also supports healthy blood clotting and reduces inflammation throughout the body. Traditionally, kale was boiled into hearty stews or eaten raw and massaged with a bit of fat to soften its fibers. This ancient winter survival food turns out to be one of the most bioavailable calcium sources on the planet, and the next plant on this list reveals an even more surprising bone-building secret. Number 2. Sesame Seeds, the tiny seed the ancients called the seed of immortality. In ancient Assyria and across the Middle East, sesame seeds were so prized for their strengthening effects that they were literally called the seed of immortality, ground into pastes and consumed daily by warriors, laborers, and the elderly who needed to preserve their strength. Egyptian records describe sesame as medicine as much as food, something given to the sick and the aging to restore what the body had lost. Ancient physicians believed these tiny seeds carried a concentrated form of life force that ordinary grains simply could not match. Modern science is now discovering that sesame seeds are one of the most calcium-dense foods in existence, gram for gram containing far more calcium than most dairy products, along with magnesium, zinc, and copper, minerals that work together to build and maintain bone density. This is where things get interesting, because studies on sesame's compound sesamin show it may also help regulate the hormones involved in bone turnover, slowing the natural breakdown that accelerates with age. But here's what most people don't realize. Unhulled sesame seeds contain dramatically more calcium than the hulled variety sold in most grocery stores, because the calcium lives largely in the outer husk that gets stripped away during processing. Traditionally, sesame was ground into tahini or pressed into halva, eaten daily as a strengthening staple rather than an occasional garnish. What the ancients called immortality, modern researchers are now calling one of the most efficient calcium sources on Earth, and the next plant reveals a secret hiding in the ocean itself. Number 3. Watercress, the forgotten stream green with more calcium than milk. Watercress grew wild along clean streams and riverbanks across ancient Europe and the Middle East, and for thousands of years it was gathered rather than farmed, considered a gift of the water rather than a crop of the field. Roman soldiers reportedly ate watercress before battle, believing it sharpened the mind and fortified the body against injury and fatigue. Persian physicians recommended it as a daily tonic to preserve strength well into old age, and ancient healers across multiple cultures independently arrived at the same conclusion, that this humble stream plant carried something essential the body could not do without. But here's what most people don't realize. Modern science is now discovering that watercress delivers more calcium per calorie than a glass of cow's milk, alongside vitamin K and vitamin C, which help the body absorb and properly direct that calcium into bone tissue instead of soft tissue. This is where things get interesting, because researchers have identified watercress as one of the most nutrient-dense vegetables ever formally tested, scoring at the very top of nutrient density indexes used by nutrition scientists today. It also contains compounds being studied for their role in reducing oxidative stress throughout the body. Traditionally, watercress was eaten raw in simple salads, tucked into sandwiches, or steeped as a daily tonic straight from the stream. This forgotten stream green quietly outperforms milk in almost every meaningful way, and the next plant on this list carries a legacy that spans an entire ocean. Number 4. Seaweed, the ocean mineral vault that built ancient coastal civilizations. Along the coastlines of ancient Japan, Korea, and the British Isles, seaweed was never treated as an occasional food. It was a daily staple, harvested at low tide and dried for the winter months when land vegetables disappeared entirely. Coastal elders in these ancient cultures were known for remarkably strong bones and long, active lives, and traditional healers credited the ocean itself, believing seaweed carried the concentrated strength of the sea into the human body. Ancient Japanese medical texts describe seaweed as essential for maintaining vitality and skeletal strength across generations. Modern science is now discovering that certain seaweeds, particularly wakame and kelp, contain extraordinarily high concentrations of calcium, in some cases delivering 10 times more calcium per serving than dairy milk, along with magnesium and iodine that support bone metabolism and thyroid function. This is where things get interesting, because researchers studying traditional Okinawan and coastal Japanese diets consistently point to seaweed as a major contributor to their exceptionally low rates of bone fracture in old age. But here's what most people don't realize. The calcium in seaweed comes bound with trace minerals that appear to enhance how efficiently the body actually uses it, rather than simply passing through unabsorbed. Traditionally, seaweed was dried, rehydrated into soups, or eaten directly alongside rice as an everyday staple, not a specialty food. This ocean mineral vault fed entire coastal civilizations for thousands of years, and the next plant on this list might be the single most underestimated calcium source in this entire ranking. Number 5. Dried figs, the ancient athlete's bone-building fruit. In ancient Greece, dried figs were considered so essential to physical strength that Olympic athletes were reportedly fed fig-heavy diets specifically to build endurance and resilient bodies before competition. Spartan warriors carried dried figs into training and battle, and Greek physicians prescribed them to the elderly and the injured to speed recovery and rebuild strength. This wasn't a sweet treat in the ancient world. It was considered functional medicine wrapped in fruit. Modern science is now discovering that dried figs contain more usable calcium per serving than a glass of milk, gram for gram, making them one of the very few fruits that can meaningfully contribute to bone density on their own. They also deliver potassium, which studies show may help the body retain calcium instead of excreting it through urine, and boron, a trace mineral increasingly linked to improved bone mineral density and reduced age-related bone loss. This is where things get interesting, because researchers studying postmenopausal bone health have specifically flagged dried figs as one of the few whole foods capable of measurably slowing bone density loss over time. But here's what most people don't realize. Fresh figs contain only a fraction of this calcium, because the concentration happens specifically through the drying process, which is exactly why ancient athletes and warriors carried them dried rather than fresh. Traditionally, dried figs were eaten by the handful as a portable strength food during travel, training, and physical labor. What ancient Olympians used to build championship-level endurance, modern science now confirms is genuinely one of the most powerful calcium sources hiding in plain sight, and the next plant reveals a secret the Chinese have known for over 2,000 years. Number 6. Bok choy, the ancient Chinese cabbage that built dynasties. For more than 2,000 years, bok choy has been a staple of Chinese cuisine and traditional medicine, grown in imperial gardens and peasant fields alike, because it thrived in cold weather when other vegetables failed. Traditional Chinese medicine classified bok choy as a cooling, strengthening food, prescribed to restore balance in the body and to support what practitioners called the bones and marrow, the deep structural foundation of physical health. Ancient records describe it being fed to children specifically to encourage strong growth and to the aging to preserve mobility. Modern science is now discovering that bok choy delivers highly bioavailable calcium, meaning the body can actually absorb and use most of what it contains, unlike some leafy greens that bind their calcium to compounds the body can't fully process. This is where things get interesting, because nutrition researchers have found that the calcium absorption rate from bok choy rivals or exceeds that of dairy milk, making it one of the most efficient plant-based calcium sources ever studied. It also contains vitamin C and vitamin K, both of which play direct roles in bone formation and repair. But here's what most people don't realize. Bok choy belongs to a small group of leafy greens that are naturally low in oxalates, the compounds that in other vegetables can significantly block calcium absorption, which is exactly why it stands out from most other greens on this list. Traditionally, it was lightly steamed or stir-fried to preserve its nutrients while still making the calcium easy for the body to access. What ancient Chinese medicine understood instinctively, modern absorption studies have now confirmed with hard data, and the next plant on this list connects an entire continent's ancient diet to modern bone research. Which of these ancient plants has surprised you the most so far? Comment below and let me know, because the next 6 plants on this list get even more powerful, and one of them might completely change how you think about calcium forever. Stay with me. Number 7. Almonds, the desert tree nut that fortified ancient armies. Almonds have grown across the Middle East and Mediterranean for thousands of years, and ancient armies, from the Persians to the Romans, carried them as portable rations specifically because they didn't spoil and because soldiers who ate them regularly seemed to maintain strength and stamina even during long, grueling campaigns. Ancient physicians in Persia and Greece prescribed almonds to patients recovering from illness or injury, believing the nut carried a dense, restorative energy that ordinary food lacked. They were expensive, prized, and reserved for those who needed real strength, not casual snacking. Modern science is now discovering that almonds are one of the richest calcium sources among all tree nuts, delivering roughly the same amount of calcium per serving as a glass of milk, along with magnesium and phosphorus, 2 minerals that work directly alongside calcium to build and maintain bone density. This is where things get interesting, because researchers have found that the specific combination of nutrients in almonds appears to support bone mineral density more effectively than calcium consumed in isolation, meaning the whole food outperforms an equivalent dose of calcium supplement. But here's what most people don't realize. The skin of the almond contains additional compounds that may help protect bone tissue from oxidative damage, which is exactly why traditional preparations rarely stripped it away. Traditionally, almonds were soaked, ground into pastes, or eaten whole as a daily strengthening ration for travelers, soldiers, and the recovering sick. What ancient armies carried for endurance, modern bone density research now confirms was quietly building their skeletal strength the entire time. And the next plant reveals a secret from the high mountains of South America. Number 8. Amaranth, the sacred grain that fed empires without dairy. High in the Andes Mountains, ancient Incan civilizations built an entire empire on a diet that included almost no dairy at all, and amaranth was one of the sacred grains that made this possible. Incan priests considered amaranth so spiritually and physically important that Spanish colonizers later banned its cultivation, recognizing how deeply it was woven into the strength and identity of the people who grew it. Warriors and laborers ate it daily, and elders were given it specifically to preserve their strength as they aged, without ever touching a single glass of milk in their entire lives. Modern science is now discovering that amaranth contains significantly more calcium than common grains like wheat or rice, making it one of the very few staple grains capable of meaningfully contributing to daily calcium needs. It also delivers a complete protein profile, supplying all the essential amino acids the body needs to actually build and repair bone tissue, not just supply raw minerals. This is where things get interesting, because researchers studying ancient high-altitude populations have pointed to amaranth as a key reason these communities maintain strong skeletal health despite diets almost entirely free of animal products. But here's what most people don't realize. Amaranth's protein and mineral combination appears to work synergistically, meaning the body may absorb and use its calcium more effectively because of the other nutrients present alongside it. Traditionally, it was toasted, ground into flour, or boiled into a thick porridge eaten daily as a foundational staple food. An entire empire built strong bones on this sacred grain long before dairy farming ever reached South America. And the next plant on this list has quietly fed more of the world's population than almost any other food on Earth. Number 9. Edamame, the ancient soybean that sustained entire dynasties. Soybeans have been cultivated in East Asia for more than 5,000 years, and across ancient China, Japan, and Korea, they became one of the most important staple foods in existence, eaten daily by peasants and emperors alike. Traditional healers valued young soybeans, what we now call edamame, as a strengthening food given to growing children, laborers, and the elderly to preserve physical resilience across a lifetime of hard work. Ancient agricultural societies depended on this single plant so heavily that entire regions structured their farming calendars around it. Modern science is now discovering that edamame is one of the richest plant-based sources of calcium available, and unlike many other calcium-rich plants, it also delivers a complete, high-quality protein that the body needs to actually build new bone tissue rather than simply supplying loose minerals. This is where things get interesting, because researchers studying traditional East Asian diets have consistently found lower rates of age-related bone fracture in populations that consume soy regularly across their lifespan, even without any dairy consumption at all. It also contains isoflavones, plant compounds that some studies suggest may help slow the natural bone density loss that accelerates after menopause. But here's what most people don't realize. Edamame delivers meaningfully more usable calcium than mature, dried soybeans, because the calcium becomes more bioavailable while the bean is still young and green, which is exactly the stage at which it was traditionally harvested and eaten fresh. Traditionally, edamame pods were steamed and eaten straight from the shell as a daily snack and side dish across entire regions of Asia. What sustained ancient dynasties for thousands of years turns out to be one of the most complete calcium sources modern nutrition science has ever measured. And the next plant carries a legacy that stretches from ancient Rome to your local grocery store. Number 10. Broccoli, the ancient Roman vegetable bred for strength. Broccoli was cultivated by the ancient Romans, who selectively bred it from wild cabbage specifically because they valued its strengthening properties, and it quickly became a staple in Roman households, prized well before it ever reached the rest of Europe. Roman physicians recommended it to soldiers recovering from injury and to the elderly experiencing weakness, believing this dense green vegetable carried a concentrated restorative power that lighter vegetables simply lacked. It was considered a food of resilience, something eaten to prepare the body for hardship or to recover from it. Modern science is now discovering that broccoli delivers highly absorbable calcium, and because it's naturally low in the oxalates that block calcium absorption in many other vegetables, the body is able to actually use most of what it contains rather than losing it during digestion. This is where things get interesting, because researchers comparing calcium absorption rates across different foods have found that the body absorbs calcium from broccoli at a rate comparable to, and in some studies exceeding the absorption rate of calcium from dairy milk. It also delivers vitamin C and vitamin K, both essential for collagen production and proper bone mineralization. But here's what most people don't realize. Lightly steaming broccoli, rather than boiling it, preserves significantly more of its calcium and vitamin content, because boiling allows minerals to leach directly into the cooking water and disappear down the drain. Traditionally, Roman households cooked it simply, with olive oil and salt, treating it as an everyday strengthening staple rather than an occasional side dish. What ancient Rome selectively bred for physical resilience, modern absorption science now confirms is genuinely one of the most efficient calcium sources in the entire vegetable kingdom, and the next plant on this list has a reputation stretching back to ancient African healing traditions. Number 11. Moringa, the miracle tree that Okinawan elders swore by. Across Africa and South Asia, Moringa has been called the miracle tree for centuries, planted specifically because nearly every part of it, the leaves, the pods, and the seeds, could be used as food or medicine, even during seasons of drought when almost nothing else survived. Traditional healers gave moringa leaves to nursing mothers, growing children, and the elderly, believing it carried a uniquely complete strengthening power that ordinary vegetables didn't have. In more recent generations, elders in Okinawa, one of the longest living populations on Earth, incorporated moringa and similarly dense greens into their daily meals well into their 80s and 90s. Modern science is now discovering that moringa leaves contain an extraordinary concentration of calcium, in some measurements delivering multiple times more calcium per serving than an equivalent portion of milk, along with protein, iron, and potassium that work together to support bone density and overall physical resilience. This is where things get interesting, because researchers studying moringa have found that its unique combination of nutrients appears to support both bone formation and the reduction of the chronic inflammation that gradually weakens skeletal structure with age. But here's what most people don't realize. Dried moringa leaf powder concentrates these minerals even further than the fresh leaf, which is exactly why traditional communities dried and stored it to use year-round rather than relying only on the fresh harvest. Traditionally, moringa leaves were cooked into stews, dried into powder, or steeped as a daily tonic believed to sustain strength across an entire lifetime. What traditional healers across 2 continents independently discovered, modern nutritional science now confirms, is one of the most concentrated calcium sources on the entire planet. And the final plant on this list brings us back to where ancient wisdom and modern bone science meet most powerfully. Number 12. Nettle leaf, the ancient mineral tonic that built unbreakable bones. Nettle leaf grew wild across ancient Europe and Asia, and despite its painful sting, herbalists across countless cultures independently discovered that once cooked or dried, it became one of the most powerful mineral tonics available in nature. Ancient healers prescribed nettle specifically for weakness, brittle bones, and the frailty of old age, brewing it into teas given daily to those who needed to rebuild strength from the inside out. Medieval herbalists described it as a plant that restored what the body had lost, and traditional midwives gave it to new mothers to help rebuild strength after childbirth. Modern science is now discovering that nettle leaf contains a remarkably dense concentration of calcium alongside magnesium, boron, and silica, a combination of minerals that researchers now understand work together to actually build and maintain strong, resilient bone tissue rather than acting alone. This is where things get interesting, because silica specifically has been shown in modern studies to play a direct role in collagen formation, the structural protein that gives bones their flexibility and resistance to fracture, meaning nettle may support bone strength in ways that calcium alone simply cannot achieve. But here's what most people don't realize. Nettle must be cooked, dried, or steeped before eating, because the same stinging compounds that make it painful to touch raw are neutralized by heat, unlocking the mineral content that has made it a trusted tonic for thousands of years. Traditionally, it was brewed into daily teas, cooked into soups, or dried and stored to be used across the entire year as an ongoing strengthening tonic. What ancient herbalists across an entire continent trusted to build unbreakable bones, modern mineral science now confirms is genuinely one of the most complete bone-building plants that has ever grown wild on this earth, and it costs nothing more than the time it takes to boil a pot of water. 12 plants. 12 mineral-dense secrets that ancient civilizations relied on for thousands of years before anyone ever heard the word calcium. And every single one of them is still sitting on a grocery store shelf, growing in a garden, or waiting along a riverbank right now, completely ignored by modern diets. Your skeleton doesn't need a pharmacy. It needs what it was designed to eat. If this video opened your eyes to what your body has actually been missing, hit that subscribe button right now, because every single week I'm bringing you the forgotten plants, the ancient remedies, and the healing wisdom that kept our ancestors strong for thousands of years before modern medicine ever existed. Comment below and tell me which plant on this list surprised you the most. And stay tuned, because next week's video is going to completely change the way you think about the food sitting in your kitchen right now.